Pattern number 44, from Exercises in Knitting. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betsy Bush, February 2009. Exercises in Knitting by Cornelia Mee. Pattern number 44, Receipt for a Stocking. Number 10 Mee's Persian thread and needles number 22 are the proper sizes. Cast on 56 stitches on the first needle and 48 on each of the other two. Knit 1 row plain. Second row. Knit 40 stitches plain, seam a stitch, knit all round plain. Knit 12 rows in the same way, all plain but the seam stitch. Now the pattern begins. Seam a stitch, knit 23 plain, seam a stitch, knit 15 plain. This will bring you to the center seam stitch. Seam this stitch and knit 15 plain. This brings you to the end of the first needle. Seam a stitch, knit 23 plain, seam a stitch, knit 23 plain. This will end the second needle. Seam a stitch, knit 23 plain, seam a stitch, knit 23 plain. This ends the third needle. Seam a stitch, knit 6 plain stitches, bring the cotton forward, knit 1, bring the cotton forward, and knit 1. Continue to bring the cotton forward and knit 1 till you have made 12 additional stitches. Knit 5 plain, seam a stitch, knit 15, seam a stitch, knit 15. This is the back of the stocking and must always be knit the same, 15 plain, 1 seamed, and 15 plain. Seam a stitch, knit 6 plain, bring the cotton forward, and knit 1. Continue this till you have made 12 additional stitches as before. Knit 5, seam a stitch, knit 6, bring the cotton forward, and make 12 stitches as before. Knit 5, seam a stitch, knit 6, make 12 stitches as before. Knit 5, seam a stitch, knit 6, make 12 as before, and knit 5. This finishes the row, and you have 60 additional stitches for the pattern. Seam a stitch and knit 35 plain, seam a stitch and knit the back of the stocking, seam a stitch and knit 35, seam and knit 35, seam and knit 35, seam and knit 35. This ends the row. Knit 2 rows more same as the last. You have made stitches enough for the pattern and begin it. First row. Seam a stitch, knit 2 together 6 times, bring the cotton forward, and knit 1. Continue this till you have 11 holes made. Bring the cotton forward and slip a stitch, knit a stitch, pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one, slip a stitch, knit a stitch, pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one. Continue to slip a stitch, knit a stitch, and pull the slipped one over it 4 times more, which should bring you to the seam stitch. Knit the back of the stocking and continue this pattern round the other 2 needles, which will conclude the row. The next 3 rows are knit plain, except the seam stitches, which must be attended to. This finishes the pattern, and you begin again at the first row, and repeat the pattern 45 times. You then begin the heel. Knit the seam stitch on the first needle plain, then knit the pattern row of the stripe. Knit the back of the stocking, and knit the first stripe off of the next needle, using the needle you have knit the stripe and the back of the stocking with, remembering that this is the pattern row. Knit the seam stitch at the end of the stripe plain. You have now 2 stripes and the plain back of the stocking on the heel needles, and 3 stripes on the front of the stocking. With the front you have at present nothing to do. The first or pattern row of the heel is knit. The remainder of the heel is to be knit with double thread. Second row. Slip a stitch, seam 35 stitches, knit plain stitch, seam 15, knit 1 plain, seam 15, knit 1 plain, seam 36. Third row, slip a stitch, knit 35, seam a stitch, knit 15, seam a stitch, knit 15, seam a stitch, knit 36. Fourth row, slip 1, seam 35, knit 1 plain, seam 15, knit 1 plain, seam 15, knit 1 plain, seam 36. Begin again with the pattern row, remembering that there is 1 plain stitch at the beginning and end of each needle, which stitch must be slipped at the beginning of every row. Repeat this pattern 9 times. At the 10th time, slip a stitch, knit 7 double stitches, make 8 holes, narrowing from the last hole 7 times, in the same manner as usual. This will reduce the pattern 6 stitches. For the 11th time, slip 1, knit 7 double stitches, make 2 holes, narrowing from the second hole in the usual manner. This will have reduced the heel 14 stitches in each stripe, and finishes the pattern. Knit 10 plain rows, knitting all the seam stitches except the middle one plain. The heel must now be closed. The narrowing must begin in the row of plain knitting, not the seamed one. Knit 26 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 11 stitches, which brings you to the seam, knit 11 stitches beyond the seam, slip a stitch, knit a stitch, pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one, turn back, slip 1 stitch, and seam 11 stitches, knit the seam stitch plain, seam 11 stitches, seam 2 together, turn back, slip a stitch, knit to the seam stitch and 11 stitches beyond, slip a stitch, knit a stitch, and pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one. Continue this narrowing till you have knit up all the stitches at each side. Take up the loops all along the side of the heel. They should be 29. Knit them with the single thread, knitting the 2 last on the needle together. This begins the gore. Knit the 3 stripes on the front needle, in the pattern as usual, only remembering that you have no seam stitch between the gore and the pattern. Take up the loops all along the second side of the heel, and take half the heel stitches on the same needle. Then slip the first stitch. Knit the second, pull the slipped stitch over it, knit the remaining stitches on the needle. There should now be 41 stitches on each of the side needles. The middle of the heel ends the row. Therefore, the first needle is the one which begins from that place. Knit 15 stitches plain, make a stitch by taking up a loop of the last row, knit 3 stitches, make another as before, continue to knit 3 and make 1 till you have increased 11 stitches, which will bring you within 4 stitches of the end of the needle. Knit them plain. Knit the front needle in the second row of pattern, knitting 35 and seaming 1, knitting 35, seaming 1, knitting 35, which ends the needle. Knit 3 stitches, make 1, knit 3 as before, till you have made 11. Knit 15 plain, which ends the row. There should now be 51 stitches on each of the side needles. You must knit to within 2 stitches of the end of the first needle, knit them together. Knit the front needle in third row of pattern, third needle, slip a stitch, knit a stitch, pull the slipped stitch over it, knit to the end of the needle plain. The next row is not to be narrowed at either place. Continue to narrow the side needles as directed every second row, carrying on the pattern on the front needle, till you have reduced the stitches on each side needle, the first to 35 and the second to 36 stitches. There will now be 173 stitches all round. Continue to knit the side needles plain, and the front in pattern, till you have repeated the pattern from the beginning of the gore 32 times. Join on the second thread, and narrow the pattern 14 stitches in each stripe in the manner directed for the heel. There will now be 136 stitches on the needles. Knit 8 plain rows. Divide the stitches exactly, leaving 68 on the front needle and 34 on each of the side needles. The first needle of the row is the same as before. Knit to within 3 stitches of the end, slip 1, knit 1, pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one, knit 1 plain. Second needle, knit 1 plain stitch, knit 2 together, knit to within 3 stitches of the end, slip 1, knit 1, pull the slipped stitch over the knitted one, knit 1 plain. Third needle, knit 1 plain, knit 2 together, knit 1 to the end, knit 1 plain row all round. Continue these alternate rounds till you have reduced the stitches to 88. Then narrow every row, as directed, till there remain only 30 stitches on the front needle and 15 on each of the others. Cast off and fasten the thread. End of pattern 44.